constantly, God, give me insight. I need to see. I want to be able to discern the time, discern the age that we're living in, and to understand what's happening around me. Not to be just carried away by popular opinion or what this person's saying, but just to have the vision to see the world as God sees it and to interpret it correctly and to make proper decisions and mostly not to live in fear, a fear of what might be coming. So insight has been a big deal for me personally, and Kay and I pray for this all the time. She prays for me, Lord, please give me insight. So I wanted to go today to the Gospel of Mark. If you have your Bibles, I don't have any things for the screen, so just turn your Bibles to. Actually, we're going to be concentrating on Mark chapter 4, but just let me give a kind of a quick overview of the Gospel of Mark. It's a very action-packed gospel. When you read through it, just make note of how many times Mark says, immediately, and immediately Jesus went, and immediately this happened, and immediately and it's like everything is immediately. Nothing's taking very long. Chapter 1 starts out, Jesus is baptized, he calls his disciples, and starts his healing ministry. Chapter 2, there's the paralytic healed. They lowered him through the roof, and Jesus healed the paralytic, caused a big stir among the Pharisees because he said, your sins are forgiven instead of you're just healed. Chapter 3, he heals a guy on the Sabbath, the withered hand, and he gets in trouble again for healing on the Sabbath with the Pharisees. Also, he encounters lots of demons, and he casts out demons, and it's an interesting thing. The demons always say, what do you want with us, Son of God? I know who you are, you're the Son of God. The demons are always saying, you're the Son of God. And it's like no one ever heard that because the disciples are always missing this point. But anyways, so the demons, he's saying, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, zip it. Well, he doesn't actually say zip it, but it's kind of there. Mark chapter 4, it says he began to teach again by the seashore. It's talking about the Sea of Galilee. Can you picture Israel, the Sea of Galilee, Mediterranean here, Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River goes down to the Dead Sea. Sea of Galilee is the lowest elevation, minus 685 feet, below sea level, the lowest freshwater lake in the world. And it's the second lowest lake. The Dead Sea is even lower than that, but it's not a freshwater lake. But the Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles from top to bottom and about 8 miles across. And it's kind of a, arrowhead kind of a shape. Jesus spent a lot of time around the Sea of Galilee. He grew up in Nazareth, which is about 10 miles west of the sea. And Mark chapter 4, verse 1, we find ourselves in Capernaum. Capernaum is on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. And so it says he began again by the seashore from a boat just offshore, and he was teaching in parables. The parable of the sower who went out to sow, parables of the kingdom, the man who cast seed upon the ground, the mustard seed. Many other parables he's teaching in Capernaum and by the seashore. And then Jesus said, let's go over to the other side. And you find that he's going back and forth quite a bit across here and going across there. And his disciples, they're fishermen, they're accustomed to boats, they're rowing across or sailing, putting up a sail. I'm not exactly sure how they got there, but in bad weather they were rowing. In chapter 4, verse 35, he says, let's go over to the other side. And there was a whole bunch of other people who got in their boats and followed him around, just like he could never get alone. So there's all these little boats following Jesus, and it says a fierce gale arose, and it was swamping the boat, and this is the story where Jesus is asleep in the stern of the boat, and they wake him up, and they say, don't you care that we're about to die? And he rebukes the wind, and suddenly the sea is still, which is an incredible miracle. Because for all the energy the winds has put into the waves, which are crashing over the gunwale of the boat, swamping the boat, they were suddenly a calm sea. That just can't happen. But it happened with Jesus. He rebukes the sea, it becomes still. He says, where is your faith? And they became afraid. And they said, who is this that even the sea obeys him? It's fascinating to me, and I don't want to be critical of the disciples, but they've been with him now for some time. They've been watching him, there he's healing, the paralytic stands up, and all these amazing miracles are happening. And then he rebukes the sea, and instead of saying, whoa, there he is again, look at that, folks, it's, they're terrified by this power, and they say, who is this? And they say, who is this? That the winds and waves obey him. They come to the Gerasenes. That's the southeast shore. So they've gone from the northwest to the southeast shore. I'm sure helped by the winds that were driving them. I don't know if that's where they intended to go, but that's where they ended up. And immediately they encountered the demoniac in the tombs. He's bound with, nobody can chain him, and he's this powerful individual that no one can control. And he sees Jesus coming, and what does he say? What do I have to do with you, Son of God, the Most High God? And Jesus saying, be quiet, zip it. But the demons knew exactly who he was. And it's just funny to me that the demons knew who he was, but the disciples were always saying, well, who is this? How does this work? The demons had it pretty clear. He delivers the demoniac and a herd of 2,000 pigs. The demons go into 2,000 pigs. They rush into the sea, drown themselves. People come out and see the demoniac now is normal. In his normal state, they see their pigs all dead. And instead of saying, wow, heal us, Lord, they say, get out of here. You're ruining our economy. And so he sails to another place. He crosses again to the other side. There he meets Jairus, where Jairus has the sick daughter, the woman with the issue of blood. The daughter dies. He raises her up. The disciples know this. They see this. He's doing these amazing miracles. Then he goes into his own hometown of Nazareth. He preaches in the synagogue, and they reject him, and they throw him out, and he's just astonished at their lack of faith. About this time, Herod beheads John the Baptist, and they bring news to Jesus, and he says, let's go to a quiet place. So they go back across the lake into the southeast, or somewhere in the middle probably, and people just follow him, and there's a group of 5,000 men plus women and children, and they're listening to him teach all day long. It's getting late. They haven't had anything to eat, and so now they got to be fed. What are we going to do, Lord? Well, what are you going to do to feed him? Well, they have this negotiation. How many loaves? How many fish? 5 loaves, 2 fish. And so, the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus takes that little bit and begins to break the bread, and there's constantly more bread until 5,000 men, plus the women, plus the children, are all fed, and they gather up how many baskets full? 12 baskets full of crumbs and leftovers. Out of not even a single basket full to start with, they feed 5,000, and they end up with 12. It's an astonishing miracle of God's multiplication, of God's power. This is not normal. This doesn't happen in normal life, but it happens where Jesus is. And now we come to Mark chapter 6. And I wanted to kind of camp on this for a little bit. Mark chapter 6, verse 45. And this is right after the feeding of the 5,000. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, to Bethsaida. Now, here they are, lake, they're kind of here, Bethsaida is up here, so it's the other side kind of, they're heading north. It's about a 4-mile trip from where he fed the 5,000 to where Bethsaida is. So they figure, oh, no problem, we'll get there in 4 hours. The rowing speed is about walking speed. And so 4 hours later, they should have been in Bethsaida. They might have left probably, if it was right after the feeding, what was it, 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, 6 o'clock in the evening, somewhere around there. They were in the boat, and they were going while it was still daylight. He told them to go ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away. So he was saying goodbye to everybody. After bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. When it was evening, this is after 6, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them. Now they're supposed to be going north, but they were going west. They were not supposed to be in the middle of the sea. They were supposed to be kind of hugging the shore up to the north. But they said they were straining at the oars because the wind was against them and obviously blowing them far off course. So now they were in the middle of this 8-mile-wide lake, about 4 miles offshore. And Jesus sees them out there. I don't know how he exactly sees them, perceives them, but he knows they're there. The wind is against them. Now, it doesn't say there was storm. There wasn't clouds and rain. Now I've learned about wind since I've been here in Colorado. I mean, just today. But you can have wind with nothing else, just a lot of wind. And it was in opposition, so they were straining at the oars, literally harassed in their rowing. They were physically exhausted. The headwind had been pushing them sideways and backwards. It was about the 4th watch of the night. Now, there was 4 watches. Of course, this is the 4th. The first watch was like from 6 to 9, second 9 to 12, 12 to 3. And the 4th watch was from 3 to 6 a.m. So they had been rowing at least 10 hours against this wind, and all they were was halfway across the lake in the wrong direction. They were still trying to get to where Jesus had indicated. So seeing them straining at the oars, about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Another miracle. Nobody has ever done this before. And Jesus is going to them, and he intended to pass them by. Now, this is, I don't even know how to interpret that part. He's walking on the sea. They're rowing like mad, going backwards, and he's just figuring, they'll make it eventually. I don't know what Jesus was thinking at that time, but they saw him walking upon the sea. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost and cried out. They thought they saw a ghost, and they cried out, a specter. They thought they saw Jesus. They knew what he looked like, but they figured it's a ghost, and they cried out. They took him to be a specter, not an angel. And sometimes when you're reading the Bible, and they cried out, but I looked up this word, and it's anacrazo. That just sounds like a bad word. I mean, a word that something's happening. Anacrazo! And it means to raise a cry from the depth of the throat. In other words, to shriek. They screamed like girls. Ah! It's a ghost! For they all saw him, and they were terrified. Some versions say troubled, and they were troubled. No, they were terrified. The gut was wrenched in half. They were scared to death. It was their opinion that this was a ghost. They saw the evidence in front of them and immediately said, no, this has to be a ghost. This is a terrible thing. This is frightful. I am now scared out of my wits. And so they saw him. They were terrified. Isn't it interesting how those closest to Jesus, while witnessing a miracle, Jesus walking on water, only saw what their fear let them see? This did not fit into their experiences. This did not fit into their history. They've never heard of this before. So it must be bad. And they had fear in their heart, and so all they saw was something to be terrified of, when actually who they saw was their teacher, their master, their Savior, the one who loved them more than anyone on the earth. It is interesting to me that how fear controls what we see. How when we let fear rule in our lives, we see what fear lets us see, not what is true, not what is really there. How many times have we ever, do we react to God's work in fear instead of faith? Because he doesn't work in the way we expect. Oh God, please provide for this need. Oh God, it's been a week and I've prayed every day and you haven't provided for this need and I'm really worried now. What do I, we live by fear and pray in fear, and then we miss it when we see a provision here or God's comfort coming through this person. But how many times have we just missed the blessings of God because we've been afraid? We've been praying out of fearful desperation and haven't seen correctly, haven't seen exactly what's going on. because he doesn't work in the way that we expect. It seems like a human nature trait. We see what we fear. We believe what we fear. And not to go off on a COVID thing, but it seems like all this 2 years of COVID, there's been a whole lot of fear in people's lives. And we interpret what's happening in the fear of COVID. We're afraid that we might get sick. And I don't ever remember in my lifetime such a public, whole, societal fear of an illness, of a sickness. And there's been other illnesses. There was, the SARS virus. There was the bird flus and all these other things, the Ebola thing that was happening. And they were fearful diseases, but we never, as a society, were so afraid. We need God to help us get over our fears. So they were terrified. But immediately he spoke, here it is, immediately again. But Jesus didn't let them stew in their fear. He spoke to them and said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." Or literally, stop being afraid. He's now in their boat, and he says, "Stop being afraid." And then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped. And they were utterly astonished. There's another superlative word here. They were utterly astonished. They were beside themselves. Their minds were blown. That's how we would say it right now. It blew their minds. They didn't know what to think that Jesus got in their boat and the winds stopped. Now, this is the second time, okay? Second time this has happened. But still. And then here's verse 52, and this is kind of what got me into this whole talk. Verse 51, he got into the boat with them, the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves. They were astonished, they were afraid, all this, and he said, and Mark writes, for they did not gain any insight of the loaves, the miracle of the loaves. That word insight is sousiemi. It means to put together, to set together. It means to perceive, to comprehend, to connect all the dots, and to find, I get it. To join together in the mind. All the things that they've been seeing and hearing, insight means it would come together with understanding, and I finally get it. Has that ever happened to you? I remember the most frustrating thing about school, high school, college, was working on a problem I did not understand, and working through it, and finally understanding it, finally comprehending, writing papers and trying to make sense of all the data I had gathered, and finally putting it together. I understand it now. There's such a peace that comes when everything is joined together in the mind. It's the word sousiemi is like the bringing together of two rivers. There's a retreat ground in Northern California called Mount Hermon. It's in the coastal redwoods near Scotts Valley. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, a Christian retreat, cabins in the redwoods and beautiful meeting grounds. And in Mount Hermon, there's a footbridge that crosses over two streams that join and become one. And I remember standing on that bridge, watching the two streams come together. And as they came together, you could see the dividing line with the two separate waters, one carrying silt from there, another carrying, and there was different colors of water, and there were literally two streams now flowing together, except under the bridge where the rocks and the turbulence began, you could watch the river, the streams blend into one. And I thought, this is this word sousiemi, insight. Two things coming together and blending and finally becoming one. Understanding it, finally beginning to see its perception. It signifies taking note of the significance of something and putting all the pieces together in one comprehensive whole. And this is what darkness cannot do to light. When it says the light shines in the darkness and darkness cannot comprehend it, cannot overwhelm it, darkness cannot get a hold of light. It can't put it together and comprehend it enough it just flees from it. That's all it does. My 3-year-old grandson came into my office with a little tea candle, the battery-powered kind. He loves to turn it on and off, and he had it on, and he says, Papa, I'm going to put this in the dark. And so he found a dark corner of my office, and he put the little candle there. And I said, Virgil, what happened to the darkness when you put the candle there? And he said, it turned off. I'm thinking, a 3-year-old gets it with darkness, flees, and light. Anyways, I had to find a way to brag about my grandkid. So let me go on here. It says, they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. This really shocked me the first time I noticed this. It refers to the disciples, the followers of Christ, who've been with him through all this, and it said they haven't gained any insight, they haven't put it together, and their heart is hard. Now, when I think of a hard heart, I think of Pharaoh. You know, he hardened his heart against Moses and the Israelites. I will not let your people go, and then the firstborn die, and Egypt is plundered. I think of terrible things of a hardened heart because I thought of it as unloving, complete disbelief. Well, it's kind of that way. He said their heart was hardened. It means their mind was closed. The word is puru. It means to petrify, to become callous. It's like a carpenter's hand that's covered with calluses. It's been used so much, it's not sensitive, it's not tender anymore. The hand is calloused. It's tough. Phil will like this, Pastor Phil. It means to be rendered stupid, because he said how much he likes to say that word. I don't know. Their heart was hardened. They lost the power to understand. Their minds were conditioned to favor the natural law. They assumed doubt and skepticism. They could not see or comprehend even what was right in front of them. They had a dull brain, a dull mind. And what shocks me, or really I relate to this is not just them. This is kind of the way it is when you're coming to know Christ, when you're coming to know his ways. He doesn't make a lot of sense, and he does things that are contrary to our intuition, to the way we do it, the way we think about it. Now think about this. The day before, 24 hours earlier, they were part of the feeding of the 5,000 with 5 loaves, 2 fish, 12 baskets of leftovers, a miracle of Jesus' power over the natural order. They participated in this miracle. They distributed the food. They handled this miracle food with their own hands. They witnessed it with their own eyes. They gathered up the baskets full of leftovers with their hands. They carried them to Jesus. They stood there. They must have been astonished. They're just, wow, what have we just seen? A miracle. Then they became exhausted from all the work, frustrated that they couldn't get where they were going, straining at the oars, supposing he was a ghost. They were terrified. They were collectively afraid. And there's an interesting thing, is that all together they were all afraid, because it says they all cried out. It wasn't just one guy. They were all screaming like girls in that boat. Must have been something to hear. As a group, they had missed it. As a group, they had not connected the dots. They had not connected his works to who he is, who he was. What do these works say about him? Who must this be? You know, it's again astonishing. Who is this? The winds obey him. What do you mean, who is this? But that's how it was. Chapter 8 opens up with another feeding miracle. Feeding the 4,000 with 7 loaves and a few fish. And it's interesting, in that chapter, we forgot to bring bread. Oh no, and it's the same scenario. How are you going to feed them? What do you got? Well, we got these loaves and fish. And let me just read this portion. It says, they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? The second time this is mentioned in Mark. The first is the narrator, Mark, is saying, well, they didn't have any insight and their heart was hard. And Jesus actually says, do you have a hardened heart? Have you become so dull you can't get this? Then he goes on, having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up? They said to him, 12. No, okay, this is how I kind of see it. Don't you understand? Back a few days ago, we fed 5,000 with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. And how many baskets did you pick up? I can see the disciples. 12. The feeding of the 4,000, we had the 7 fish. And how many baskets? 7. I just kind of, we're not supposed, yeah. Maybe some head slapping going on. I don't know. I don't think so. It doesn't say in the Bible. And he was saying, do you not yet understand? Oh, it must have been so frustrating to be the Son of God amongst all these people. You're doing everything you possibly can. And his question to them is, do you not yet understand? It's hard to be critical of them. We do the same thing today. We do the same thing.